Hello classmates, my name is James Austin. This is my critical assignment presentation on Driving Miss Daisy. When it came to choosing a movie that would be thought-provoking and cover some very interesting concepts that we learned in this class, my thought was Driving Miss Daisy. It was the story of an unlikely relationship that began in Atlanta, Georgia in 1948 between a black chauffeur named Hoke and a wealthy Jewish woman named Miss Daisy. It looks at how their relationship grew from a very contentious one that Miss Daisy fought against from the beginning to becoming the best of friends. This presentation will look at how they dealt with perception, conversation rules, and relationship dynamics over their 20-plus year relationship. When it comes to interpersonal communication, perception has a lot to do with how people interact with each other. In 1948, perceptions of blacks and Jews were very stereotypical, especially in the South. Blacks were hired to do manual labor and do various servant-type jobs, while Jews were looked upon as being tight with money, but good as business people. Although blacks were house servants and drivers, they played a big part in the lives of those they worked for. When Hoke started to work for Miss Daisy, she looked at him as someone who was going to sit around eating up her food. She even went so far as to accuse him of stealing a can of salmon because, as she says, they all take things, you know. Her perception was that all blacks take things, and Hoke was no different. Although they started out with the perception of each other that was very stereotypical, that perception changed over the years. As they spent more time with each other, they began to see the other in a more personal level. This shows that a person's perception of another is based on how much they know about that person. The more we know about someone, the more accurate our perception would be. Now, when it came to the conversational rules between blacks and whites, it was all about hierarchy, especially between servants and employers. As depicted in the movie, Miss Daisy often spoke to Hoke as if he were a child, and he was expected to, and most of the time did, respond to her with yes, Miss Daisy, or no, Miss Daisy. He was expected to show respect to his employer. An example of this happens when Hoke first went to work for Miss Daisy. She talked to him like a child. She even said at one point they're like having children in the house. They want something, they just take it. Later in the movie, Hoke refers to this when he must stop to make water. Hoke says, "Now how do you think I feel having to sit up here and ask you if I can go make water like I'm some child?" "Well, I ain't no child, Miss Daisy." Now, so even though these were people entrusted to take care of their homes and drive them around, they were still spoken to in this way, as they were servants and seen as simple-minded like children. Because of the communication rules of the time, they did not leave much room for people to get to know one another outside of race, religious, or social status. It was not appropriate for people to of these different backgrounds to communicate with each other on a very personal level in a social setting. Throughout the movie, we see how this communication rules are or can change when we remove the constraints of what is deemed appropriate and we get to know each other on a personal level. The last concept I will cover is relationship dynamics. This includes 6 stages of friendship, 3 of which are role, limited interaction, nascent friendship, and stabilized friendship. All 3 of these were very important stages in the relationship between Hoke and Miss Daisy. They are great examples of how a relationship can grow as we get to know a person outside the social norms. Their relationship began with role-limited interactions. Miss Daisy was very leery and standoffish with Hoke at the beginning. She did not want a driver and did not know Hoke, so she did not trust him much at all. She knew nothing about him and applied the stereotype of how blacks were perceived at the time in the South. She did not want him nosing around her things and did not want him doing anything. It took 6 days before she finally let him drive her to the store, and it took him driving alongside her as she walked down the street to the store. During the nascent friendship stage, Miss Daisy began to look past the stereotypes of blacks and began to see Hoke as a person rather than the help. This change did not happen overnight. It took many years. Even as their relationship grew into more of a friendship, it was still not until Miss Daisy's temple was bombed that she realized that her and Hoke had more in common than she had ever thought. Driving Miss Daisy is a great example of how perception, conversation rules, and relationship dynamics can change when people spend enough time getting to know each other on a personal level. When we look beyond stereotypes and conversation rules, relationships have a chance to grow into friendships. It takes time and personal investment to change our perceptions of others and see them as individuals and not just some stereotype. This movie showed how it can happen even during such turbulent times, such as the South in the 50s and 60s. I suggest anybody who really wants to look at some interpersonal communication styles and some of how hard it can be, especially when you're living in a stereotypical world like that of the 60s, that Driving Miss Daisy is a great movie, and I suggest all of you go see it. Thank you. Bye.